Hi and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today we're talking about the rise of the food truck. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh.
Normally when you talk about the rise of something, it's like the rise of the Roman Empire. It's like this giant, massive social phenomenon. But, you know, in the U.S., actually, the food truck is a massive social phenomenon. And it's related to the fact that city real estate has gotten so expensive that no one can afford to open a restaurant in a house anymore. So they open them in trucks and then they drive around and they establish like a lunchtime venue.
Wow. 好，所以呢，首先我们这一篇文章的中文标题是餐车街头行动美食馆啊。那餐车就是 food truck 啊。那 food truck 刚刚这个 Angela 讲说，其实在美国现在真的可以用 the rise of 来形容，因为 the rise of 通常是一个很伟大的一个事情，或者是最少规模很大的事情啊。那主要是因为美国的大城市现在的房地产啊，这个非常的昂贵啊，那店面租金也非常的贵。那很多人呢，其实没有办法这个在店面开店啊，因为那样子成本太高，赚不了钱，所以开始很多人就用餐车。那这也是一个求生谋生，同时提供食物的一个办法。
The rise of the food truck due to rising real estate prices. Okay, let's read the article. In recent decades, food trucks have become increasingly common in cities across the world. You've probably had at least one meal or snack from a food truck if you've ever been to an outdoor festival. In cities like Los Angeles or Miami, food trucks can be found all year round, selling everything from simple sandwiches or hot dogs to gourmet cuisine. The history of food trucks goes back to the late 17th century. At that time, populations began to grow rapidly in urban areas. Cramped living conditions resulted in street kitchens and food stalls popping up to serve the community. People then began using carts to provide food for different neighborhoods. Food trucks do basically the same thing today, but they can travel much farther distances. From a business perspective, food trucks are practical because of their mobility. That is, the kitchen can travel to where the crowds are. Food trucks typically schedule visits to different neighborhoods on different days to build up a customer base across their city. Many people hoping to open a restaurant will first invest in a food truck since the initial costs are much lower than those of buying or leasing a storefront property. In addition to serving food, food trucks have also earned their place in K-pop culture. In South Korea, actors and actresses are often sent customized food or coffee trucks on set by their fans or their celebrity friends. Then they will pose in front of those food trucks and upload those pictures to their social media. Such exposure is also beneficial for these small businesses' development. Okay, food trucks, yeah, I don't think they go back to the 17th century. I think that they go back throughout history. Because, you know, ancient Rome and other ancient cities, they show that there's like 7-story buildings. And they show that there's not really cooking facilities inside these buildings. So that means that people were going to the street to buy their food because otherwise, if they're not cooking it, how are they eating? So I think food trucks and food carts are way longer than 300 years old.
所以呢，这个 Angela 是说呢，也许这个 food truck 它的历史不只是300年了哈，因为其实在古罗马的都市里面就发现他们也有楼房啊，但他们房子里面有的时候会找不到厨房，那表示说他们要买食物的话，他们要吃东西的话，应该就是必须去外面买啊。那好像也没有看到什么餐厅，所以他们那个时候应该可能就有某一种的这种food truck。Either
food trucks or food stalls or food stands.
Yeah, 或者是最少会有摊子啊，这个饮食摊一定是有的。
And Pompeii, for instance, there's all sorts of food stalls. They're like, when you look at them, they look a lot like night market stalls in Taiwan. Like they've just got like a couple of ovens there and a counter, and they found like remains of food inside there. And I'm like, gosh, you could potentially taste Pompeii food.
Yeah, 好，所以在庞贝好这个被火山埋没的淹没的这个古城里面呢，他们其实发现也有很多的这种 stalls， 就是摊贩，有很多的卖食物的摊贩。
So where you have people, you're going to have food stalls, I think.
Yeah, 饮食摊 Yeah.
Yeah. So in recent decades, our article starts, in recent decades, that means in the last 10, 20, 30 years, because decades is 10 years, and we said decades, so it's 2 or more. So in recent decades, food trucks have become increasingly common. They're more and more common in cities across the world. So not just in American cities, although those are the ones I'm more aware of because of the English-speaking internet tends to be centered around American issues for reasons.
好，那我们看看第一句，他说 in recent decades 就是近几十年来，一个 decade 是10年，那他加了 s 表示好几十年，所以近几十年来呢 food trucks 就是食物的这种餐车呢 have become increasingly common. Increasingly 就是 more and more 好，然后越来越受欢迎，越来越普遍。在哪里受欢迎受普遍呢？ In cities around the world 或者 across the world 全世界的都市里面餐车越来越普遍。那其实我建议各位可以把这句话背起来，因为你前面主词可以换一下，然后就可以说 something has become increasingly common in cities around the world 或者 across the world 这个写作文这样一句话很快就写出来了。
Like coffee trucks are really common here, right?
Yeah, 例如说的这个咖啡的这个车子这个那也是一样，越来越 increasingly common.
My favorite thing is when you're biking in the mountains and you come across a coffee truck and you're just like, yes, I could use a coffee right now.
这个你有时候像如果骑脚踏车在山里面骑得很累突然看到一个这个咖啡的这种这个车子的话，哇，那感觉很棒。
So you've probably had at least, just at the minimum, one meal or snack from a food truck if you've ever been to an outdoor festival, if you've ever gone to an event that's held outdoors. There's almost certainly food trucks at these events.
好，所以 you've probably 你可能 had 就是吃过at least 至少 one meal or snack 至少吃过一次餐或者是吃过一次点心 snack from 是从这个 a food truck 从餐车上面点过吃过一次餐点或者点心尤其是 if you've ever been to 如果你曾经去过一个 outdoor 就是户外的 festival 就是节庆活动，所以现在很多户外的节庆活动都会有餐车或者是这个饮食车咖啡车在那边。
Now, in cities like Los Angeles, which is in California in the United States, or Miami, which is in the state of Florida in the United States, food trucks can be found all year round. And the reason is the weather is good. Well, the weather is good in Los Angeles. The weather is not cold in Miami. I would never describe the weather in Miami as good because wet and hot. Do you know Florida and Taiwan sort of basically have the same environment?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, but Taiwan also has Taiwan culture and Florida is just Florida. So if you're going to choose Taiwan. But anyways, in Los Angeles and Miami, you can find food trucks all year round selling everything from simple sandwiches. So there's nice, alliteration there. Simple sandwiches or hot dogs. So those are also simple. But then we're contrasting it to gourmet cuisine, from something to something. That's a phrase, it's a collocation, it's a phraseology that you use to describe a range of things. So it has to be from simple to complex, or from hot to cold, or from left to right, or from small to big, or something like that.
Yeah, from one extreme to another.
From one extreme to another. So we're going from simple sandwiches to gourmet cuisine. Cuisine is a fancy word for food. If someone is calling something cuisine, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be complicated, and it's not going to be very filling. I'm just going to say.
好，所以呢，这个刚刚讲到 cuisine 这个字呢，中文大概之类是料理那英文也是跟中文很像，料理很像。就你冠上这个名字之后呢，感觉起来就会变得比较贵、比较复杂而且可能会吃不饱那种感觉那我们来看看这个句，他说呢，在一些都市，例如说洛杉矶或者迈阿密这些都市里面呢，这个 food trucks can be found 可以被看到 all year round 一年到头都看得到。那他们看到他们在干嘛呢？ selling 他们在贩售 everything from 那我们看到这种 everything from 这种句型的时候，我们就知道应该是 everything from A to B， 就是 两个 extreme A 跟 B 正好是两个极端，所以表示它涵盖的范围很广那在这个地方我们看到它是 from A or B 然后 to C 这也是一样，这个有点变化的用法也可以那这个 A 是什么呢？ Simple sandwiches 就是简单的三明治，或者是 hot dogs 就是也是简单的它比较简单的一种食物，热狗这个要注意这个重音在前面 hot dogs 不要念 hot dogs hot dogs 是 dogs that are very hot 这很热的狗所以
Well, they are.
Oh yeah, they
but
are.
You wouldn't eat most hot dogs, but you would eat a hot dog.
Yeah, 好，所以要弄清楚然后呢，或者是 gourmet 是美食所以美食料理，所以它有很简单的三明治跟热狗，但是呢也可以有很美味的美食家的料理。
So the history of food trucks goes back to the late 17th century. Now, when somebody says this in an article, you have to consider the language it's being written in. So if this article is being written in Chinese, we're probably talking about late 17th century China. Since this is being written in English, we can just assume the author means late 17th century Europe or America, because they're not specifying, so it must be within their own culture.
好，所以呢这个他这里说是可以追溯到17世纪末那因为这是英文写的，所以我们大概可以理解他这个应该指的是在西方世界的17世纪末。然后我们再看到这个句子呢，各位可以也是这里有一个很好用的一个 chunk， 就是 the history of something goes back to 某一个时候就这个东西它的历史可以追溯到什么时候，所以这句话就是说这个食物餐车的历史可以追溯到17世纪末。
So at that time, in 17th century Europe, populations began to grow rapidly in urban areas. And the quick backstory to that is people were being turned off the land. Land was being enclosed and made private property, so they had to go somewhere. And also industrialization was happening, and so people were opening factories, which was usually near cities. And so people started moving out of the countryside, because they had no house anymore, to cities and working in factories.
好，所以呢这个句子讲到说在那个时候17世纪末的时候，那populations 就表示很多不同群的这个人口它不只是一群人很多人，很多不同的群的人呢开始他们人口开始怎么样增加，而且是迅速的增加跟成长，尤其是在都会地区urban areas。
Cramped living conditions. If something is cramped, it means you don't have a lot of space. Like imagine if you put on a shoe that's too small for you, your toes would be cramped. So these living conditions where people were living cheek by jowl, they were living side by side, very tight conditions, resulted in street kitchens and food stalls popping up. If something pops up, it suddenly shows up to serve the community. Because if you're using your kitchen for people to live in, you're not going to want to cook there, so people are going to buy food.
好，那刚刚这个 Angel 老师用到一个感觉蛮古老的一个用法叫做 cheek by jowl。是 CHEEK 第二个字是 BY 第三个字是 JOWL 那这个 cheek by jowl 就是大家挤在一起，那个你感觉这个脸都挤压在一起那种感觉就挤在一起。好，那我们来看到这个地方，他说在那个时候呢因为大家人口成长，所以呢 cramped 就是很狭窄的， cramped 本来意思是挤在一起的，那也就表示空间很狭窄很拥挤的。Living conditions 就是生活环境或者居住的环境，生活环境很拥挤很狭窄，那 resulted in 造就了 street kitchens 就是街头的厨房还有怎么样 food stalls 小吃摊这些东西怎么样 resulted in 这些东西，然后后面加一个分词来表示这些东西怎么样状态呢，是 popping up 冒出来，然后目的是 to serve the community 服务街坊邻居所以因为居住环境很拥挤，就使得街头出现了街头厨房还有小吃摊都冒出来了那这样子他们才可以去服务那些这个家里面没地方煮饭的人。
People then began using carts to provide food for different neighborhoods, because where there's a need, there's people who will make money fulfilling that need, basically.
Yeah. 好，所以人们 then 就接着然后呢他们就开始怎么样 using 使用 carts 就是推车， 来干嘛呢？ Provide food 提供食物 for 给谁呢？ Different 不同的或者是跟自己不同的 neighborhoods 就是邻里或者社区所以大家慢慢觉得有这个市场，所以就开始用推车，然后呢开始去别的地方提供食物了。
So food trucks do basically the same thing today. What is a truck but a motorized cart? But they can travel much farther distances because someone's driving it and not pulling it. So, yeah, also cities are bigger.
好，所以这个食物餐车呢 do basically the same thing today. 今天他做的事情基本上是一样的但是呢这个餐车当然他们可以 travel 就他们可以走可以行进 much farther 更远的 distances 更远的距离那这个地方讲到距离的长短呢它的比较级通常我们是用 farther F-A-R-T-H-E-R
You could also say further. But
Yeah, further 也可以但是呢这个你如果要严谨一点的话大家是分这 further 是比较抽象的 farther 是比较具体的不过在这里现在或者应该说现在呢 further 跟 farther 其实差不多已经混在一起了。
Yeah, most people that I know who are native speakers don't distinguish at all.
这大部分的母语人士呢已经不会去区分这个 farther 跟 further 之间的差别了。
Okay, so from a business perspective, from the point of view of somebody who wants to make money, food trucks are practical because of their mobility. Mobility means you're able to move something around, or it's very easy to move around. And that makes them practical. Practical means that it's sensible or that it's realistic, it's easy to use, or it's good for a particular purpose. But practical, honestly, the best way to say it is 实用, like 就很好用, right?
Yeah, 很实用的意思好，所以我们看到这句他说 from a business perspective 就从做生意的角度来看 perspective 就是一个角度看事情的角度好，所以从做生意的角度来看呢这个餐车是很实用的 practical而且很实际好用的为什么呢？因为他们的 mobility 就是机动性或者是灵活性。
In fact, I want to recommend to ESL speakers to use this word practical more. I find that people use the word useful a lot, but practical is just so much more to the point. It's like it's good for its purpose.
好，所以 practical 这个字很多时候是比 useful 这个字还要更准确而且更精确的能表达你的意思practical 就是很实用，它既然实用一定表示它很有用但它是很实用而且是这个功能符合你的需求。
Yeah, that's the main point, is that for your purpose, this is what you need. So if you want to send a message to somebody in Alaska, it's practical to use a computer.
所以你如果要传递一个讯息给一个在阿拉斯加的人那这个 practical 的做法就是你就用电脑吧就用这个 email 就可以了。
And the opposite is impractical. It would be impractical to throw a message in a bottle into the water and hope that your friend in Alaska got it.
Yeah, 那 impractical 加个 im 就是不切实际的那你如果说这个实用的相反就不切实际的，那你说要有讯息要给住在阿拉斯加的人，那不切实际的做法就例如你把它放在一个瓶子这个封在瓶子里面，用个瓶中信，希望它飘到阿拉斯加去那这个就是 impractical.
So let's look at why food trucks are practical. Why are they particularly suited to this use? And that's because the kitchen can travel to where the crowds are. So, for instance, if a bunch of people are around a university between the hours of like 10 and 2, but then later in the day there's no people, but over in the business center after 5 o'clock there's going to be a bunch of people, it's useful, it's practical that you can sell food at noon at the university and then go over to the business district in the evening. If you were a brick-and-mortar restaurant, you have to wait for the customers to come to you. But in a food truck, you can go to where the customers are.
好，那 that is 也就是说，那这个移动这个厨房餐车的厨房呢，可以 travel 可以移动到 where the crowds are 在人群所在之处。好，所以哪里有人，他就去哪里卖，这样子是很 practical 的。
Food trucks typically schedule visits to different neighborhoods on different days to build up a customer base across their city. So they want to have different people get used to them showing up in different places. I kind of hated that though, because you're like, oh, I really could have some oxtail stew right now, but it's not Tuesday.
Yeah, 所以他说这个 这种餐车呢 typically 就是典型的，一般它都会 schedule 就是排定安排 visits 就是拜访，或者他会去安排要去哪里，去不同的 neighborhoods， 而且是 on different days 在不同的日子，它的目的是要 build up 要累积它的 customer base 客群或者客户群啊。那 across the city 整个城市各处它都有它的客户群啊。那当然这 Angela 老师刚刚讲但是有时候你很想吃某个东西的时候他没来，或今天他不会来啊，那个时候是很让人泄气的。
Now, many people hoping to open a restaurant will first invest in a food truck. If you invest in something, it means you put your money into something. And the reason they'll do a food truck before they'll do a brick-and-mortar restaurant is because the initial costs are much lower. Buying a food truck or renting a food truck is much cheaper than buying or renting a place in a building. So these costs are much lower than those of buying or leasing, which means renting, a storefront property, which means a brick-and-mortar physical store.
好，这个 brick and mortar 就是后面如果加个什么store 的话，就是指实体的商店啊，因为 brick 就是砖头。好，这个 mortar M-O-R-T-A-R 啊，它是指这个连接砖头的啊，像水泥这样的一个东西。好，所以当我们讲到 brick and mortar store 就是一个实体的商店，或者一个 a brick and mortar restaurant 实体的餐厅。好，所以我们这里看到呢，他说这个很多人呢，他们希望 hoping to open a restaurant 希望能够开餐厅的人呢，他们都会首先 first 会 invest in 投资在一辆这个餐车。为什么呢？因为 the initial costs 初始的费用 are much lower than 比什么比起来要低很多，比 those 这个 those 代表的就是 the initial costs， 它比那个你要 buying 你要购买啊，或者是 leasing 租啊要承租一个 storefront property 一个店面的房产要便宜得多。简单的说，它的意思就是你要去租房子来开店的话呢，那费用很高，初始费用很高。那你如果说是一开始只是做一个餐车的话，那初始费用会低很多。
So, in addition to serving food, food trucks have also earned their place in K-pop culture. So suddenly we're popped over to Asia, and we're talking about Korean pop culture.
所以 in addition to 除了 serving 供应食物之外呢，食物餐车他们也 earned their place 赢得了一席之地啊，在哪里？在韩国流行文化里面 K-pop culture 里面也有一席之地。
In South Korea, actors and actresses are often sent customized food or coffee trucks. So it looks like customized food, or coffee trucks. That's what it could look like, but it's actually customized, meaning changed for a person, like it's like made just for one person, and then they're trucks that are either food or coffee trucks. And they're sent these customized trucks on set by their fans or their celebrity friends. Wow, that would be cool. Although don't do that for me because I don't have a place to put a celebrity truck.
啊，所以呢，在南韩啊，这个男演员跟女演员呢，他们常常 are sent 就是被派送啊，就人家送来给他啊。什么样呢？什么东西呢？送给他呢？就是 customized 客制化的 food 就是食物啊，或者是 coffee 咖啡的 trucks 餐车。所以有的是食物餐车，有的是咖啡餐车，客制化的，专门为他设计出来的。然后呢 on set 送到哪里去呢？送到他们拍片的现场。on set 就是指在拍片现场。那这谁送来的？是他们的 fans 他们的影迷啦，歌迷影迷啊，或者是除了影迷之外歌迷之外，也有可能是 celebrity friends 就是名人的朋友。
Then they will pose in front of those food trucks. So they'll take a picture with cute, poses in front of these trucks and upload those pictures to their social media.
然后呢 they 他们就会 pose 摆姿势 in front of those food trucks 在那些食物餐车前面摆姿势照相的意思。然后呢 upload 就是上传这些照片到他们的 social media 社群媒体上面。
Such exposure is also beneficial for these small businesses' development. So exposure means media exposure, which means people getting to see your name frequently in the media. So it's a kind of advertising, but it's like done for free. And it's beneficial. It helps. It helps give them things. In this case, it helps them develop. The small businesses develop.
Yeah, exposure 是曝光，所以像这样的一种曝光呢 is beneficial for 就是对谁来讲是有利的，对于怎么样？对于这些小生意 small businesses 他们的发展 是有用的，所以他可能只是本来是个餐车，因为可能跟某一个名人照了一张相之后，大家说哦，原来有这样的一个餐车，那他就发了。
Okay, so that's all the article we have, but we have some questions here for you. Number one of which is, according to the passage, which of the following is not true about food trucks?
根据本文，下列关于食物餐车的叙述何者错误？
The answer is C. They do not provide comfortable seating for diners. Seating is your job.
好，所以 C 这个是正确答案，因为他说呢，他们为用餐者提供舒适的座位，那这个是错的，因为餐车没有提供座位，所以这个是正确答案。
Number two, which word in the passage or in the article means very crowded?
好，那文中哪一个字的意思是 very crowded?
And the answer is cramped.
那答案就是 cramped 这个字，大写小写都可以。
And number three, why are many people choosing to invest their money in a food truck before they open a restaurant?
好，为什么很多人在开餐厅之前选择将钱投入食物餐车呢？
And the answer is because the initial costs are much lower than those of buying or leasing a storefront property.
因为开食物或者投入食物餐车的这个初始费用呢，比你要开一个实体店面还要低得多。
And number four, last one. In South Korea, actors or actresses will post pictures of them blank with food trucks they receive from their fans or friends.
所以呢，请你从文章里面选一个字填入下列这个句子的空格，而且要视语法的需要做适当的字形变化，这样才能够让这个句子的语义完整，而且同时要求语法正确，符合文意。
So the word that fits here is posing. They will post pictures of them posing with food trucks they receive from their fans or friends.
所以刚刚那个句子呢，我们显然要填的是 posing 这个字，这个文章里面都有这样的句子。
So that is all we have for you about food trucks, but please join us again tomorrow or another time for more Ivy English. Until then, bye-bye.